Welcome to the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. I am your host, Heidy De La Cruz, and I am on the mission to change the narrative of immigration, one immigrant story at a time. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. I am your host, Heidy De La Cruz, and today I have La Doctora Lissette Sanchez, and I am so excited to talk to you today. And thank you again so much for being willing to share your journey and your story. And we actually had a little bit of, technology trouble before starting, and even we had scheduling trouble because I had to reschedule the original one that we were supposed to do. But I'm so glad we're here now, getting this recorded. And again, thank you so much for being here. So if you can just introduce yourself to the audience, who you are, what you do, and then we will get started talking about growing up in LA with your immigrant parents.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Heidi. I'm so happy to be here and so excited. And hopefully no more tech issues throughout our recording. So, I'm Doctora Lissette, and my pronouns are she, her, ella, and I have a few different hats that I wear, but the Doctora title comes from being a licensed psychologist, and I am also a speaker and a writer.
Awesome. Perfect. And so let's get into now that I know that you're a writer. You've had a few articles on Hip Latinas and things that I've seen. So I definitely want to get into that as well. But let's get started with growing up in LA with immigrant parents. Now, your unique situation is your dad is from Mexico and your mom is from El Salvador. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? It's unique as I look back on it, but when I was growing up, it was my normal. Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, in Los Angeles or in LA, like I met a lot of people who had one parent from one specific country, another one from the other. I have close friends who are half Salvi and half Mexicans, but maybe it's just different parent switch. So it felt pretty normal for me. So I want to just kind of acknowledge that. I think there's a lot of privilege in growing up in these the term is a cultural enclave, where these communities where I feel seen in, right? Everyone around me looks like me, everyone around me speaks the same way, and everything just kind of becomes enmeshed. So it didn't feel like there was a direct distinction between what it was like to be Salvadorian and what it was like to be Mexican, because it really much blended. And I want to share a story about what that blend looks like, specifically because I think of my mother. So recently, I know we're going to talk about this later, but I'm just going to tell a quick story. I finally got to visit El Salvador with my mom. And while we were there, she had a craving for mariscos. All right. And so we're somewhere and she was like, a cóctel de camarones. All right, Heidi, when you hear cóctel de camarones, what do you imagine? Do you know have you had that before?
So it's like, I picture like a glass. And then it's kind of like a ceviche, right? So you have like the shrimp and the, el limón and sal and stuff like that. So that's what I picture of a cóctel of camarones.
Yes. Okay. Growing up in more of that Mexican food, because the one thing about Southern Cal or LA, there's a lot of Mexican food. Cóctel de camarones is that it is a camarones. It has a line, but it also has like a tomato clamato soupy thing, right? So that's what that is. We were in El Salvador and we're, by the beach and we're at a restaurant. My mom's like, "Ooh, tienen cóctel de camarones on the menu. I want a cóctel de camarón." And then they get the cóctel, but in El Salvador, a cóctel de camarón is very different. It's not this image of what you have. And she had this moment where she had forgotten. She had forgotten how different it would be. And she didn't realize actually that it would be different. And so she's like sitting there like, this isn't what I thought it would be. And so I bring that up because of the enmeshment of culture, because to my mom, the cóctel de camarón that she knew and became familiar with was the one that she grew up
in Mexico,
or like we're here in the US, which is the Mexican one. So we're there. And for anyone listening, the cóctel in El Salvador is more of like this mayonnaise, tomato, like it's kind of like this pink sauce that it's in. So it's more mayonnaise, I think, is also huge in Mexican Salvadorian food, right? Like you think of the ensalada de pollo, all of that has mayonnaise. So I think of that cocktail and I think of that being my experience growing up with these like multicultural, multi-ethnic backgrounds. Everything just felt like very much blended, but it was blended favor to the Mexican side of certain things, like the food, right? Like when I have rice, my mom makes rice, it would be like more of the Mexican rice. She learned to cook for my dad. right? And so like for him, so things were blended. Now I still had pupusas, I still had some of these things, but even, yes, we love pupusas. But even my Spanish, right? Like we use more of the Mexican Spanish because there are differences, right? So we use cipote or cipota. Like I've heard these, but I heard them more from my grandmother or from my aunts who also married other who have Salvadorian spouses or partners. But my mom, everything blended. So, we weren't using these words in our daily, like in our day-to-day. It was just, I knew it, but it was as unfamiliar. Yeah. And most of my mom's family came to the US. So I grew up around all of them. So we would make pastelitos, which are like the Salvadorian version of empanadas. We'd make nuegados, which is like this fried yuca dessert, super yummy. I enjoyed all of these things. I would do that with my grandmother. But at the same time, we're making flan and, arroz con leche in Mexican style, right? And so we're doing all these things. So I don't know, for me, culture really, if you think about all the food, but I guess my whole point is that there's so much more similarities than there are differences, which is why it blends so much and so well together.
Yeah. And I love how you said that, because to me, it is a unique experience that your dad is from Mexico and your mom is from El Salvador, because of where I grew up. Like Hispanics were like, the Hispanic parents were from the same country. Either they came together or they met here, but it was from the same country. So like, for example, if I had a friend who was Mexican, both of her parents were Mexican. But if I had a friend from Puerto Rico, both of the parents are from Puerto Rico, and so on and so forth. But, you're right. You grew up in LA, which is completely different than Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I grew up. So it was like heavy, Hispanic population. So for you, it wasn't unique, but for me, it is. And so it just really depends on where you are in the United States, which is why I love talking about growing up with my guests, because it really depends on where they grew up. If they did grow up with a lot of people from different Hispanic countries, or if they grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood and they were the minority. So like I've had guests from both ends of the spectrum. They're like, well, I thought the whole United States was very diverse until I went to college. And the other way.
Yeah. I was like, I learned very quickly how I'm not diverse the rest of the US. But also, I have a lot of praise for growing up in that cultural enclave. I think there was a lot of protection from feeling othered a lot in those settings. And it was also a bit of sheltering, right? So then there was a big culture shock when I ultimately moved and left. It was like, oh, not everyone has a tiendita in the other apartment in their building. Like you can't just go buy your Diet Coke en apartamento 12. Like you can't just do these things. And so, so it was like a little barrio, which is a very Mexican term.
Barrio, yeah. Oh my gosh, so interesting. So tell us about that. Tell us about that cultural shock experience right here in the United States when you went to college.
Oh yeah, right. So like I said, cultural enclave. So I get everyone around me. My high school is like 80% like Latina, predominantly Mexican. So that's what I was familiar with. And I will say, I think you touched on this slowly, but growing up, although I lived around my mom's family and I was exposed to that culture in my day-to-day, when we did travel, it was to visit my dad's family, but my dad's family lived on the border. So it's also very different to have family on the border in a town called Tecate, like the beer. For anyone listening, that is where they have that is where they have the factory. That's exactly the town where my dad's family moved to when my dad was a young boy, because he grew up in a different area in Mexico.
Okay.
So that was my closeness to my family, how that is. And my dad's one of 11. And my mom's one of like 4 or 5. So always a big family. Yeah. So again, just to add to the bubble, but culture shock. I move away from home, and I go to college, and so the Tecate reference is important because I choose to go to college in San Diego. And, San Diego is between LA and Tecate. I'm literally in a sandwich between families. Like I'm 2 hours from my parents. I'm, hour and a half from my grandma and all my like tios and tias. Like this will be like a nice little like support system. That's what I was thinking. That was very, very different. I'm not going to go into the college experience. I've talked about that in other spaces, but just my family, as we're talking about the American dream, it makes sense. My family had a perception of what that American dream was. Mine was very different. So they didn't want me to move away from home.
Oh.
Yeah, they didn't want me to move away. They expected me to stay home, go to a community college or a local college, and then I'd move out when I was married. Right?
Oh,
So like that was,
yes. Yes. That is that's a different culture in the US than for us. Like we stay in the house until we married. In the American culture, it's like once you're 18, the parents want you out of the house. So
yeah, yeah. So
yeah.
they didn't want me to go anywhere, but I'm like, I'm going. Like I'm going. And so I go to college, and I'm lucky because in my suite mates there were a lot of other Latinas, and like everyone would know it's a La Latina like dorm, right? And so again, more comunidad. And I will bring this up over and over again because honestly, that's what saves me in the moments of culture shock. Because I'm there and I'm just being exposed to just a different way of thinking and studying. Like I was struggling academically, and when I first started there, so that was hard. And I always connect my shock to the foods, right? And being exposed to different foods and how different it was, how bland or how extra spicy certain things were, depending on what I was having. So I think that the bigger shock, and then the otherness, I think that's the biggest one, where suddenly I'm not like everyone else. There's something about me that's different. And I start to wonder about that. And I start to think like, well, I'm different. Like, what does that mean? Like and realizing that, when I grew up, I always thought about, my parents made sure we had food on the table. We had, what we needed to survive. But then I realized that, we were working class. We didn't have access to all of these different experiences that my like my peers had as well. So like, oh, there's a social class difference here. Like I hadn't anticipated. I didn't thought, your first gen.
Yeah.
I don't know. So that I think that was a big one, the social class, and obviously my ethnic background. That's when I would go into places and suddenly be the only one, and those experiences, they made me feel so small. I was this very outgoing, and I won't say that I completely stopped being outgoing in terms of my personality. I think that's part of my core. But when I came to the classroom, and again, I went through to a PhD, and I will say, but when it came, so like I've been in a lot of education settings, but in the classroom, like I said, that's probably when I felt the smallest, the most quietest, because that's when I was like, oh, I gotta make sure I'm ducks in a row. Everything's good. I don't do anything. I don't step out of line. This is such an important opportunity, and I need to take advantage of it. But when I struggled, I'm experiencing a lot of stress, that culture shock, that adjustment. I didn't know who to turn to, and I tried to go to where do I ask for help? And my parents can't help me. They're just like, échale ganas, ponte las pilas, like words of affirmation and encouragement that eventually came. But I'm like, well, they tell me I should go to the counseling center. So I'll go to the counseling center, but then I go to the counseling center and I find that the majority of the time I'm explaining my culture to the person, like why I think about things, why I'm this, and because there was no one there who looked like me. None of my professors looked like me, at least not in the psychology department. We had them in the Chicano studies department and the Latin American studies department, but not when it came to our like core major. So I would say the biggest shock was feeling the first time I started to feel othered, the first time that I had experiences where I felt left out, or I was left out of some things and couldn't understand what it was. And it wasn't until my master's program that I had a word for these experiences. And the word is microaggressions. So people were not being outwardly racist, like overtly racist, which is, I think, probably would have made sense a bit more for me. But in the moment, there were just a lot of assumptions being made. And microaggressions are basically these subtle racist remarks that people make, subtle terms of othering, right? So, people complimenting my English. And remember, I'm in San Diego. Yeah, you know this.
Yes.
I'm in San Diego, so I'm near the border, right? So lots of assumptions made about my own immigration status, my own citizenship status, and just the comments around, or getting excluded from something and not being able to find a reason why, and then thinking like, is it because of like my background? Is it because of my identity? Like, what is this? You're questioning it when you understand the term, and then you realize, oh, that's what I was feeling.
Have you been thinking about starting your very own podcast? Well, I created a podcast course to help you launch your podcast without feeling overwhelmed and with simplicity. Okay. So it is a 6-week podcast course. Each video is less than 15 minutes long, so it doesn't take that much time to get through. And it breaks down the steps that you need to launch your podcast. Again, 6 weeks or less. So you can do it faster than 6 weeks, or you can take longer than 6 weeks. It's all up to you. You do it at your pace. And you will get lifetime access to this course. In addition to the 6 modules or the 6 videos, you also get videos about editing. You'll also get the podcast digital planner, which helps you create your content. It helps you with the episode outline. It helps you with the show notes outline. It helps you stay on track with the podcast cycle checklist. It has the guest intake form and also a Google Sheet episode organizer to make sure that you are organized and set up from the jump to be able to plan out your content, organize your episodes, because that is key to long-term podcasting, right? You'll also get 3 exclusive interviews with leading podcasters who are killing it in the industry. And in addition to all of that, you will also get the podcast workbook, like how to launch a podcast workbook that goes along with each module. So you can watch the videos and then also follow along with the workbook. All of that is included in the course. If you are interested, head over to my Stand store. The link is in the show notes and the show description, so you can sign up for the course. And there's also a referral program included. If you refer someone to me to launch their podcast and they sign up for the course, I will give you $50. That's right. You will receive $50 if the person you refer does sign up for the podcast course. So all the information is in my Stand store. If you have any specific questions, you can always email me at Heidi@HeidiDeLaCruz.com, and let's get your podcast launched.
Like in my mind, I'm like, is there something wrong with me? What am I not understanding? But I just didn't have a term to define that I was feeling othered. I was feeling microaggressed.
Oh my goodness. So all of that experience, and you still went through master's, PhD. So what kept you going? Like, what was your drive to keep going?
I think in my heart, I like what I get to do, what I do for a living. It was something that I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to be a psychologist. No sé de dónde me nació, but when my earliest memory was in 7th grade, telling my teacher, I'm going to be a psychologist when I grow up. She said, you have doctor handwriting. I can see you doing that. And I have learned that sometimes we have to have a selective filter with certain people around us. And so my filter was, she said she could see me doing that because this is my dream. Right? This is what I want to do. And so it's what I wanted to do. And so every step of the way, regardless of the challenges, they were not going to stop me from achieving my dream. It's like, I was very motivated, very driven, very eldest daughter of me.
Yes.
But I was like, this is what I want. This is what I'm going to do. And I initially, it was a dream of just wanting to help people, wanting to understand mental health and culture. But then it also became about wanting to increase representation because I was tired of coming into the classrooms and seeing no one who looked like me, not just teaching the class, but in the materials that we were learning. Right? If you learned about Latina mental health, there was one chapter maybe in the book. That was the extent of it at the time. And I found myself feeling just like this calling almost. It's like, well, I want to do this and we need the representation. And I'm going to just do it. I'm just going to do it and hope that, and obviously like bring anyone else I can with me along the way and kind of figure it out. So a lot of pioneering, a lot of trailblazing, because being the first, you're figuring a lot of things out, right? I'm the first to graduate from, that's right. I'm first to graduate from high school. So like my parents were like, we don't know. You figure this out. When I ended up getting into a master's at Teachers College at Columbia. And I told my parents, oh, I'm going to go to Columbia. And they didn't understand what that was. My dad's like, ¿Te vas a Colombia? ¿Otro país? I'm like, no, Dad, no, Dad. It's a school in New York, but it's okay. It's a good school. I promise. It's a really good school. And it's a lot of people know about it. So it's a good place to go to. So a lot of educating my parents, right?
Yes.
So, but there's so much mental health through this that I can like talk about. But I think what I'll just speak on is this has just been my biggest dream. And I find that this and with all first gens, because that's what I specialize in working with, I always talk about how we maybe look back and think about a lot of these skills, like I share, the struggles, the challenges, but what we don't think about as much are the different strengths that were associated with these experiences of us growing up. So my parents taught me the value of hard work, adaptability, resourcefulness, right? And every single one of those skills is what helped me be able to overcome those moments that I felt othered and had to pivot, right? I had to adapt. And I had to reapply. I had to figure, I couldn't pay for this. I got to get another scholarship. I got to get another job. What can I do to make this happen? So really implementing their lessons. So it was my drive for wanting to increase representation, but also it was actually leaning into the lessons that my parents taught me. And, I think for me, when we talk about that experience, it's sometimes we look back, you're like, oh, my parents didn't have a proper education. They didn't have like white collar jobs where they had a lot of support. They weren't entrepreneurs, but what they did have was a core set of values that they instilled in me that helped me in my hardest moments.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Beautiful. What did your parents do growing up? Like, what were their jobs?
Yeah. So my mom worked as a cashier. She did a few factory jobs, but for the last, since I was in second grade, she has worked as a cashier. It used to be Save-On, and now it's CVS. So that's how long she's been there. And my dad used to work as a cook at the police academy. And then at some point they laid him off. So he cleans pools now.
Okay. I'm always interested to hear like what the parents do, because it's always interesting to know. And I remember my dad at one point, he had like 3 jobs, and like I barely saw him, so I was like with my grandma a lot, but it was like, it's what he had to do, to provide. And so it's like,
exactly,
they do whatever it is they need to do to provide without any complaining either. It's just like, like you said, it's just like, they just go, go, go. It's like, okay, this is what we have to do. We came to this country. This is what we have to do. It's just like that. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, definitely nonstop.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to get into visiting Mexico for the first time, whatever you remember.
Yeah.
And then we can talk a little bit about visiting El Salvador recently that you said that you went.
Okay. So like I mentioned, my dad's family lives on the border. So we'd go often to the border town. But I also want to share about my first time and the only time that I have visited the town where my dad grew up. So my dad, or where my dad was born, and he grew up to be like 8 years old there. And then they went to Tecate. So it's kind of a mix. He has his own emigration, right? Like within the country.
Okay.
Yeah. Like they can within the country. And so my dad was born in Tepesala, which is a small town in the state of Aguascalientes in Mexico. It's kind of like central. And I was there one time right after I graduated high school, actually. We took this trip, and that was my trip of experiencing different parts of Mexico. It was my dad, my mom, my grandma, my brother. My brother's 6 years younger than me. And I think, I'm trying to remember if we had any other aunts or uncles join, but it's been a while. So that's who I remember. And we went to a few different cities. Like I think flew into Guanajuato, and then we're taking buses into the area so that I could get to know them. So I got to not just see my dad's place of birth, but I also got to see other areas of Mexico that I hadn't been exposed to. And And that experience was so profound because one, I think it was my first time getting on an airplane when we went. And I just remember how beautiful everything was and how my image, I think, of Mexico, like the border town is very different. I feel it's just like a really small town. And sometimes there's a little like festivales or things that come through that help it be a bit more vibrant. But otherwise, it just feels more like this suburb, this really small pueblo. But being in these other areas and immersed in the culture and the different celebrations and obviously trying the different foods, and just like blew my mind of just how different it could be. And I will always remember we were, I think, in Zacatecas at some point, because this was like, I think, a 2-week trip. We fit in as much as we could. And we were on this tour. We stopped by this little like restaurant on the side of the road, and they were cooking things in la leña, so like wood burning stove, I guess I call it. And that was the best mole I've ever had in my life. And I'm always going to talk about food, but it was just, the architecture, everything that I saw were, I think, images of things that I maybe had only seen in pictures of like Europe or, and it makes sense. It makes sense, right? That I would be seeing similar architecture in Mexico, but it just was such a challenge of, I think, the poverty image that I had of certain areas of Mexico, and kind of seeing the richness of the culture and the beautiful things that were offered. And we spent a lot of time mostly in religious places because that's where my family felt the most comfortable and the safest. But overall, it was just like I was 18, so like I was just like enamored by it all, and just got all this exposure to so many different parts of Mexico and just how they could be. But that experience is very different than my experience recently in El Salvador, because in Mexico, like, a lot of this was still familiar. I got exposed to it, but it was still familiar. In El Salvador, going there as an adult now, basically 18 years later from that experience, so like I'm a whole other person now. And so I went with an intention, right? When I was 18, I went with just like for fun. I was a kid. I'm like, you figure it out. But as an adult, I'm like, I'm with an intention of, I want to connect. I want to understand, see what it's like. And I did have a culture shock when I got to El Salvador. And it was around how people ate pupusas. I didn't realize that people ate them with their hand. People eat pupusas with their hands. And I felt so like, I felt some type of way where I was like, oh my God, I've never eaten pupusas like this. What does that say about me? What does that mean? That this is how, like, why is this how my family taught me when I was in the US? Why was I not told, like, this is how you eat this? Why, for me? And so, but that said, like, with that reflecting, my mom, when she came to the US, faced a lot of moments where that made her feel small. She grew up in such a rural area, so she didn't know that people had to wear deodorant, like, and things like that. And she would always feel embarrassed by them. So when she raised me, she wanted me to be proper around a lot of things, right? So her way of assimilating. So it was to eat with a fork and knife. You don't make sounds with your utensils. You got to be careful. The amount of times she sat me at the table, she's like, you're making too much noise. gotta be quiet, gotta whatever. So I think that was a big shock for me. And then realization hit that, the reason I learned it this way is just because my mom, it was just really different. She's just trying to fit in because she left El Salvador in 1981, in the middle of the Civil War. It was very, very dangerous. Her and her family had already experienced violence. And so they fled for their lives. And my mom tried to go back once in 1990, and she was so terrified the whole time she was there because there's still active violence going on. So she spent the whole time just inside the house. She brought me, I think I was 2, and the story I remember from that trip was just, you wouldn't stop crying, and so I was so upset with you, I was two.
Yeah, you could probably just feel the fear and the danger around you as a child.
Yeah, I was two. And so this year I've been wanting to go to El Salvador. I've been wanting to connect. And so this my mom finally was like, let's go. It's like, all right, let's go. Before anyone changes their mind, I booked the flights, I did the whole thing. I was like, vámonos, nos vamos. And and yeah, it was beautiful to kind of witness it with her, and because she hadn't been there in 34 years, right? And so what it was like to experience that with her, but then also experience it for myself for the first time. So the bit of the culture
Yeah.
shock, but at the same time, I saw myself everywhere, right? Like
Oh,
I saw people who looked like me. So my features are mixed. Like that's when I understand some of the mixed features. I connected with some family. I learned about like my nose, how that's my grandfather's nose, and like feeling a lot of pride in certain things.
yeah.
So hearing these stories I'd never heard before and connecting with a part of me that I like, I think had just been waiting to come out and has been really special. And it makes me emotional as I talk about it. But I'm so happy I got to go. I'm so happy that I have this renewed sense of pride in my Salvadorian side of my family.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then that I know what it feels like to physically be there and to feel at home in a country that I'd never been in before.
Yeah. Oh, I
Yeah.
love that. That's so deep. Being so connected to a place you had never been before, but it's part of you, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I
It made
love
me feel
that.
closer. Yeah. I think I get emotional because it made me feel closer to my grandma. So my grandma passed away in
Mm,
20, 2016. Yeah, 2016. She didn't get to see me graduate. And so that was hard.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad you
Yeah.
were able to go. I'm glad you were able
Yeah.
to have that
Thank
experience with
you.
your mom. Sounds
Yeah.
like it was, a very great experience. And I
It
love I
was.
love talking about that with people and I love
Yeah.
sharing that because it is different, growing up in the
Yeah.
US and then going back to where your parents grew up and
Yeah.
your grandparents and hearing their
Mhm.
stories
Yeah.
and things like that. It is a very like I want to say like a very spiritual thing too. Like it's just
Mhm.
different because I know because when I experienced going to the Dominican Republic, it's like you said, it's like that sense
Yeah.
of pride. Like I am
Yeah.
so proud to be Dominican,
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
Salvadorian or Mexican. It's amazing. I love that. So let's
Mhm.
talk a little bit more about your work. So you mentioned that you
Yeah.
help first
Yeah.
gen. So
Yeah.
what first gen specifically do you help and what areas in
Yeah.
their life do you actually help them with?
Yeah, so I typically work with first gen professionals and sometimes first gen college students. And so what I want to clarify, because when I say first gen, I'm not talking about generation for immigration. I'm talking about generation for these lived experiences. So you can be a first gen professional and be a first gen immigrant. And when we say first gen immigrants, that usually means that you're the first person, I guess, to come to the US. Whether doesn't matter what point you came, but you're the first person to come. And then technically I am a second generation immigrant because I was
Mhm.
born here and my parents came here. But
Yes.
I'm a first gen, in my education and first gen in my career. So I typically work with the people who are straddling the two cultures. And oftentimes that's again first and second gen immigrants, but they're first gen professionals or
Hmm.
first gen college students. And I do that through individual therapy. And that's for people who work in California and or who live in California. And I also do speaking engagements where I talk about the different first gen mental health, the strengths, and and the challenges. But the challenges that first gen experience are not just unique to first gens. And so I often do give speaking engagements where I talk on the impostor phenomenon, intergenerational trauma, and generally destigmatizing mental health in
Yes.
Latina communities or in all communities. And I write about all of this. So I write about the first gen experience. I write about Latina mental health and just in general. Again, my whole goal with everything that I do is one to increase representation because it's again, when you see someone else who looks like you doing something, then it reminds you that that's an option for you.
Yeah.
And two, to also just have more of these conversations to help us heal from the intergenerational trauma, the microaggressions or reverse racist comments that we experience in our life, and then just generally be able to move through the different emotions we feel, right? Like earlier, I had a moment where I felt, again, the grief of like having lost my grandmother. Yeah. And in those moments, they're hard, but I feel connected to her again in those moments. So I'm like, it's okay. It's just an emotion, and we can move through emotions. But I think in a lot of the Latina culturas, like across all of them that I've interacted with in my work, emotions are seen as very negative. Right? Yes. Like we don't want you to, especially don't think that way. Don't do that, right? So I think that's my big mission in my work.
Yeah, I'm learning to unlearn that emotions are not bad.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the biggest thing that I'm working on right now with my therapist. But so how can people connect with you, and where can they read some of your articles?
Yes. So you can find me on Instagram. I'm the first gen psychologist. My website is Calathea Wellness. It'll be in the show notes so you can see how it's spelled. But what I want to share is Calathea's. Actually, this is a Calathea. It represents a plant species. And these plants symbolize new beginnings. And for me, you're first gen, you're the new beginning for your family. And so that's how we have that. This plantita is special because this plantita has been with me since my first day of me working full time for myself. Aww. So it's 2 years. So it's had some hard moments, but just like me. So we are together with that. So Instagram, then my website, I just launched a newsletter. And so in my newsletter, yes. So please follow that, subscribe to that. I have information there for first gen Latina mental health. That's where I share information on my newest article, the podcasts that I've been on to share really important conversations. And I predominantly am writing a lot for hip Latina, but I do really enjoy writing about this and have been working on, I have big dreams for that as well.
Yes, I love that. Maybe a book, maybe.
I mean, probably. Let's be honest, it's gonna happen.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Yes, I love that. And to wrap up this amazing conversation, again, just thank you so much for sharing, for being vulnerable, and then also the work that you're doing. The work that you're doing is so important. And mental health, there's still a lot of work for us in our community to do around that, and to stop the stigma and things like that. And so thank you again for the work that you're doing. And the last question that I love to ask all my guests is, what does the American dream mean to you?
I love that question so much, because I will tell you that my answer to that has changed throughout my life. I think initially my American dream was really my parents' American dream, or what I thought was their dream. To make my parents' sacrifices worth it, like to make sure that I'm doing something that's worthy of everything that they gave up. And at some point I realized that they made a choice to come because this was their dream, their search for a better life. And they did achieve that. They have a better life than what they had when they were growing up. And they did give me a better life. They achieved their first American dream. Yeah. And when I released that, then I thought, okay, well, what is my American dream? And in my mi manera, right? And so my American dream, and the way that I view it, is the power of freedom and choice. Like, you're in a country where you have options and opportunities. And I know that there's a lot of obstacles that come along, but I genuinely believe that if you want to make something happen, that we live in a country where it is absolutely possible. You may not get into that boardroom that you're trying to get into, but instead you pivot, you adapt, and you create your own. But I think this is a space where we make whatever we truly want to happen possible.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Mommy Podcast.